Well, we're going to look at the first two chapters of Numbers tonight. And in chapter 1 is the census of the military. Now, to give you an idea, we are 13 months since they have journeyed from Egypt, leaving slavery. They've been camped in front of Sinai Peninsula for quite some time, in front of Mount Sinai for 1 year. And so the end of the book of Exodus, we find we're there 12 months, and now at the end of Leviticus, we discover 1 month has gone by. And so we start on the 13th month in the book of Numbers, but it's going to cover 38 and a half years. The Hebrew name in the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, is Bamidbar, which is the word desert. They also refer to it as the Book of Murmurings. That's where they murmured a lot, and that is true. The reason we call it the Book of Numbers is from the English that we got out of the Latin Vulgate, liber nomere, and it's referring to the census or the numberings. And so the first numbering in the book of Numbers is here in chapter 1, and then there'll be one more census in chapter 26 before they head into the promised land. Wenham said this: the theme of the book of Numbers is the journey to the promised land of Canaan. Its opening 10 chapters, covering a mere 50 days, describes how Moses organized Israel for the march from Sinai to the Promised Land. David Guzik says, the Promised Land people are different from slave people. Israel emerged from Egypt as a slave people, basically unsuited for the Promised Land. Numbers tells the part of the story of how God transformed them into the Promised Land people. So in Numbers chapter 1, verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting on the first day of the second month in the second year. And they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying. So we are going to find in this book of Numbers, and the Lord spoke to Moses 150 times in 20 different ways. But make note, it's the first day of the second month of the second year. Remember the very end of Exodus 40, verse 17? It says, it came to pass in the first month of the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was raised up. So we see there that we went from the first month to the second month. Thus, the book of Leviticus took 1 month. So 1 month period going through the Levitical law, we could say, because that's how much time has gone by, 1 month from Exodus 40 to Numbers chapter 1. And what's in between that is the book of Leviticus. So we are now in the wilderness of Sinai, heading out. The wilderness, by the way, was never meant to be Israel's destination, although it ended up being that for most of the people who came out of slavery. God's intention was to bring them into the promised land of Canaan. The wilderness intended to be a temporary place, a place to move through, not to live in or meander in. So what we find in verse 2 and 3, Moses and Aaron were instructed to be the ones who numbered these people. It says, take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of their names, every male, I love this, individually, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. So take a census, and what we discover here actually is this is the second census. So what we find in Numbers is actually the second and the third census. You might remember back in Exodus chapter 38, verse 26, He said, a bekah for each man, that is a half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. And everyone included the numbering from 20 years old and above, 603,550, which we will find in this census, the same total. So they numbered them in Exodus, but now they're numbering basically a draft. So even though we know how many men there are 20 years and above, it wasn't defined into armies. So this is the difference. So they pretty much knew how many numbers they were working with before this census. And so the second census now in chapter 1 of Numbers, and then the third census is actually in chapter 26. And so in Numbers chapter 4 through 16, it's going through every tribe. It goes through the names here, every tribe. And it names them, and I'm just going to go through them quickly, from the tribe of Reuben, the oldest son, right? And then you got his sons, and then Simeon and his sons, Judah from the tribe of Judah and the sons living at this time, Issachar and the sons living at this time, Zebulun and his sons. And then from Joseph, remember, we don't have a tribe of Joseph. God gave Joseph 2 tribes. He gave both of his Egyptian sons, interestingly enough, Ephraim and Manasseh. I think about those guys often, because Ephraim and Manasseh, they grew up in Egypt, they grew up in the desert as well. But either way, they would have been from Joseph. Joseph would have raised them in Egypt in the royalty. That's where they would have grown up under. And when they saw the Jews for the first time, these shepherds, it was quite a shock for them, I'm sure. But either way, they were given 2 tribes. And then you got Benjamin and his relatives living at this time, and Dan and his lineage at this time, Asher, Gad, Naphtali, and it says in verse 16, and these are the chosen from the congregation, leaders of their fathers' tribes, heads of the divisions in Israel. I would like to point out Nashon. I didn't read his name, but look up in verse 7. From the tribe of Judah, you have Nashon, the son of Abinadab. The reason I want to point him out is because he's mentioned in Matthew chapter 1, verse 4, in the lineage of Jesus. So when they're going through the lineage of Jesus from obviously from the tribe of Judah, Nashon is mentioned there. Well, we look now at verse 17 through 19. And it says, then Moses and Aaron took these men and had been mentioned by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month. They recited their ancestry by families and their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, each one individually. So they assembled themselves together, and they gave the list of all their relatives by name, and then those living that were 20 years old and above were the ones that were able to go to war. They were counted. And the Lord commanded Moses to number them in the wilderness of Sinai. Now it says, according to their names. And it says at the end of verse 18, each one individually. So, you think about these guys, there was quite a bit of pride. I'm of the tribe of Ephraim. I'm of the tribe of Dan. You know what I mean? There is some deep down pride of what tribe they were of. And there's no doubt they dressed in a little different ways or had a little different way to fix their hair or their hat as Israel today. Today, when you go, you can see one Jewish guy, it looks like his yarmulke is like getting ready to fall off. It's on the right. Nope, he did that on purpose. That's identifying his little group within Judaism. And then the next guy will have a different color and maybe up very front of his head. Another guy way in the back in a different color. Again, these are distinguishing marks. But when these guys were called by their leader of their tribe, they knew who they were. And they stepped up. And they were proudly counted individually by name. So we discover here again that they're not just, us, like our Social Security number. Who are you? Well, here's my number, blah, 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 blah. They were a name. And they were individually, uniquely counted. That's the way God works. We know Luke 12, 6-7, right? And not 5 sparrows sold for 2 copper coins, and not one of them is forgotten before God. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. As we go on and into the kings and stuff, and you'll find when guys are killed in battle, they're named, and it's something very powerful, who they were and where they were in battle. I love Isaiah 53, 1-4. It's one of my favorite passages in the Bible. But now, thus says the Lord who created you, O Jacob, who formed you, O Israel. I love that. He came out of the womb of Jacob, but the Lord brought him to become an Israel, governed by God. He formed him. So he basically says, if God can do that for Jacob, fear not. For I have redeemed you also, like I did Jacob into Israel. I have called you by your name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. Through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I have kept Egypt for ransom, and Ethiopia and Seba in your place. Since you were precious in my sight, you have been honored. I have loved you. Therefore I give you men for you and people for your life. David understood this in a very personal way, didn't he? In Psalm 139, verse 1-4 there. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You've comprehended my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. So each by name, individually, they were called into these numbers. Well, verse 20-21, we have the children of Reuben, 46,500 men ready for battle. From Simeon, in verse 22 and 23, 59,300. Verse 24 and 25, the children of Gad, 45,650. And then in verse 26 and 27, Judah, 74,600. And then in verse 28, 29, we have the children of Issachar, 54,400. Verse 30 and 31, we have the children of Zebulun, 57,400. Verse 32 and 33, we have the sons of Joseph. Ephraim was 40,500. And then we have of Joseph also Manasseh, 32,200. Then from the children of Benjamin, we have 35,400. And then from the tribe of Dan, 62,700. From Asher, 41,500. From Naphtali, 53,400. In verse 44-46, these are the ones who were numbered from whom Moses and Aaron numbered, with the leaders of Israel, 12 men, each one representing his father's house. So all who were numbered of the children of Israel by their father's houses from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war in Israel. Verse 46. and who are numbered were 603,550. So if you do the math, and people have, and they come up with different things, but you say, okay, 20 years old, then to the point they weren't able to go to war, It really depends, isn't it? Because I think later, Joshua and Caleb, they're the two guys that said, no, we're ready to go to war. But God let them live through all those years of the desert. But that put Caleb at 80 years old. But God reserved his strength, didn't he? Remember in Judges chapter 1, he said, I am as strong at 80 as I was at 40. And I want the mountain where the giants are. That's my lot. We're the biggest giants. That's where I want to go. He was a warrior at 80. But, probably most guys around 50. Remember, we're going to discover this later with the Levites. They were to be ministers from 30 to 50. That was it. So they were in training up to the age of 30. They had 20 years of ministry, and then after 50, they were trainers of the trainees. So I don't know at this time if they really went much past the age of 50, but most people do their calculations, say 20 to 50. And then the younger boys under the age of 20, then you got women and children, and then you got the Gentile groups, which we're going to find about in this book. These guys weren't great, but they were around, but they didn't want them in their military. It's interesting, today in Israel, they keep those same patterns. I believe you got to be 21 to be in the military today, even though they train you early on. And then they do not allow you to be a foreigner, because there's many different nationalities that live in Israel. Matter of fact, there's 1 million maybe even 2 million Palestinians that live all over Israel. A lot of people don't realize that there is millions of Palestinians who live next door with Jews, and they're totally at peace, and have been for decades and decades. And then you have the Druze that live there, and there's others, but they don't allow any of them into the military. But if you do the fluctuating numbers, it's somewhere between 2 and 3 million. Most people say at least 2.5 million. A lot of people are very stubborn on saying at least 3 million. So that's a good number of people. So just try to picture leading 3 million people through the desert. Oh, boy. So on the south side, we have Reuben. He would be the main leader. But next to him, in the same club of the south, the southern club, you have Simeon and Gad. Then on the east, you have Judah. He's the head. That's the head tribe. And it's Issachar and Zebulun. Now, if you say, it's because they have the most amount of people. Not true with Reuben. Reuben was the leader with less people. Simeon actually had more. And so Judah was the leader. That's just the way God chose it, of the east, along with them, Issachar and Zebulun. Then on the west, you have Ephraim, and then along next to him was Manasseh and Benjamin. And then on the north side, you had Dan, and along with him was Asher and Naphtali. So if you add them all up together, on the east side, you have 186,400. That's the most men. So I want you to picture in your mind the triangle of the tabernacle. The triangle. The rectangle, that's Egypt. The rectangle of the tabernacle. And the tabernacle faced which way? East. East. So on the top, if we would, the top side is the tribe of Reuben, the east with Judah and Issachar and Zebulun. It's the largest number, though. Or am I getting this backwards? Yeah, I think I'm getting this backwards. The east would be on the top. or the bottom, excuse me, the bottom. The door opened to the east, so it would be on the bottom, my fault. And then on the south side, notice, it's 151,450, and also on the north side, it's 157,600. So the south and the north side are about the same number. But then you've got the west side with the lowest number. That would be the one on the top. Forgive me. So the west side is the smallest number on the top. And then the east side would be the largest number on the bottom. And then on the two sides, they're both around 150,000. Interesting, isn't it? Because from an aerial point of view, you get the shape of the cross. Do you remember how we did this with the tabernacle itself? You've got the Holy of Holies, and then you have the incense, and then on each side you had the table of showbread and the menorah, and then in front you had the washing bowl outside, and then you had the burnt sacrifice of burnt incense. It also, the tabernacle inside, made the shape of a cross. And so now, if you were high up on a mountain looking down, you would see this traveling cross. Or at least when they stopped and they put it all up in order, that would be the case. So I think we have a few more pictures, right, Josh? Keep them going. Has he been changing the pictures?
Bryan, sorry, I'm looking. I have to ask.
See, there's the cross. Don't question it. Go. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Yeah, keep going.
The other picture was better to look at.
Well, there's a few of them. So here, this might help you here again.
I'm thinking everybody had a 10. I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think so, or some kind of little lean-to. So there you see it, where you have Ephraim at the top, Judah at the bottom, and Dan and Reuben on the sides. Is there any more pictures? There's that. Yep, that's it for that. So, okay. Which picture did you like the best?
Not that one.
Yeah, put the one that Pierre likes. Which picture is that? That first picture?
It was the number 2.
Number 2, the second one. That one? No, that.
This is a great one.
Okay, good. Okay.
So you attack, like people attack this thing, they have a hard time getting in.
I would think so. I mean, you've got, it's pretty good. I mean, they can't come on your flank, can they? Because you got it pretty well covered. So in verse 47 to 54 now, we actually have a little note about the Levites. And he tells us about the Levites, and I may have, yeah. The Levites here, it says, were not numbered among them by their father's tribe. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel. So remember, there's really 13 tribes. If you get two for the Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, that's how you get 12. So if you had Joseph with only one tribe, and then you get 12. But there's really 13 tribes, because the Levites were not counted as a tribe. So when you say the 12 children of Israel, that's true. The 12 kids of Jacob, that's true. And then you say the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, yeah, for military purposes, that's true. For census purposes, for the military, that was true. But really, there was 13 tribes, which 13 is the number of victory. And when they later are going to go around Jericho, they go around 13 times. So you say, oh, I thought 13 was an unlucky number. For Satan, it is. Yes, it is. So going on down here in verse 49, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel, but you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall set it up. In this little note, we're going to see all the way through these couple of chapters. It says over and over, the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. In verse 52, the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every one by his own camp, every one by his own standard, according to their armies. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of testimony, that there they may be no wrath of the congregation on the children of Israel, and the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of testimony. And we will see later on, when we have the 7 cities of refuge, the Levites had the immediate land around those cities as well. So carry that concept ongoing. And so in verse 54, thus the children of Israel did, according to all the Lord had commanded, so they did. All the way around. So the census was a potential soldiers. The tribe of Levi was not counted in as a soldier. Only the tribe of Levi did not go to war with them, because they had a special responsibility unto God for those duties. So it's interesting, that's something we adopted in our country, for pastors not to have to be drafted or go to war. But yet you could volunteer to be a chaplain and be in the military. Interesting, we sort of have this picture in Revelation chapter 4, verse 4, not around the tabernacle, but it says around the throne were the 24 thrones. And on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. So it's going to be an interesting picture, but something somewhat similar in our heavenly picture. Well, chapter 2 now. So now we're organizing the tribes around the tabernacle. We've already mentioned it, but now we're going to get into some specifics. Verse 1 and 2 of chapter 2. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard, beside the emblems of the Father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. So they're going to camp with their standard or their flag and the emblem on of their father's house. Now, this is rather interesting. So once again, before we get into this, on the east side, the tribe of Judah, he's the leader. The total of all 3 groups are 186,400. Now, he also talks about, in verse 10 through 16, the south side once again. Reuben is in charge, total of 151,450 when you include Simeon and Gad. Verse 17 is a quick little reminder. The tabernacle of meeting shall move out with the camp of the Levites and in the middle of the camps, and they camp. They shall move out, everyone in his place, by their standards. So they do move out by their standards as a group, as the tabernacle is taken down and put onto wagons and so forth. And then a lot of it carried, actually, by the Levites. They would have had to have been pretty strong guys. And now going back, verse 18 to 24, Ephraim is the main guy, along with Manasseh and Benjamin, and 108,450, the smallest group. And then in verse 25 to 31, you got Dan is the main leader, along with Asher and Naphtali, of a total of 157,600. So putting all these together, as it says in verse 2, the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard beside the emblems of the Father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. So once again, we see those numbers and we see how that would have been laid out. Now, real quickly, In Jewish tradition, they actually teach the same color is of the high priest's breastplate. So in other words, you look at the high priest's breastplate, they were in order of each of the tribes. So you would have saw, this is Reuben, the first son, and so on, down the list. In Exodus 28, it tells us there, if this is the case, that you have on the first row of the high priest garment, you have a sardius, a topaz, and an emerald. On the second row, you have turquoise, a sapphire, and diamond. The third row, you have a jacinth and an agate and an amethyst. And then on the fourth row, you got a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. And so the way that looks would be something along those lines. So that's what the banners would have had in their color. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the traditions of the names of the children of Israel, if you look at all the different commentaries, there's a little bit of difference, but most of them are pretty similar. But on the four tribes in particular, it seems pretty solid. Judah is a figure of a lion. Reuben is the figure of a man. Ephraim is the figure of a calf or an ox, and Dan is the figure of an eagle. So a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. And let's look at those pictures, Josh. Now, I will make a statement on those. Keep going. There we go. Can you make that bigger? There we go. That's the one. And so those would have been the main banners for each section, although there would have been an animal for each one of them. And again, you can study that out. It does vary. It's not a hard science. And I'll tell you this here too. You think they would have had this in Jewish writing somewhere, that each name has a representation of an animal? Does not. The Jewish writing, especially the Torah, makes no mention of what the emblem was on the 12 flags. But you'd think they would, at least of the four main guys of each section, but they did not. But it's interesting if you compare this in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 10. As for the likeness of their faces, each one had the face of a man, each four had the face of a lion, and on the right side, each four had the face of an ox, and on the left side, each of the four had the face of an eagle, looking at the heavenly cherubim there. And then in Revelation 4:7, it tells us the same basic thing about these living cherubim, these creatures of heaven. It says in Revelation 4:7, the first living creature was like a lion, the second living creature like a calf. The third living creature had the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like the flying eagle. So it does seem that it does correlate with the later and other heavenly pictures that we do indeed have. So ending this in verse 32 to 34, these are the ones who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses. All who were numbered according to their armies of their forces were 603,550. By the way, the same number as at the end of Exodus in that first census. But the Levites were not numbered among the children of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses. Thus the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so they camped by their standards, so they broke camp, each one by his family, according to their father's house. What do we learn? Number one, God is counting each one of us individually. Of course, very specific according to Psalms 39, and even more specific according to Matthew, right down to the numbers of our head. Secondly, if God can take care of this large group in the desert, the hardest place to take care of somebody, right? I mean, it's hard to take care of one person in the desert. It's hard to keep one animal alive in the desert. But you're talking 3 million people, most likely, with lots and lots of animals, a lot of food, a lot of water, a lot of things. But God took care of them. So can't we be confident that God can take care of us today? So many verses that refer to the stories and numbers, and then to tell us God will do the same for you. We're going to discover as we go through Numbers, we're going to be blown away how many passages refer to the stories in Numbers. You guys are familiar with that Corinthians chapter 10, where it says, there's no sin that's not common to all men. But he goes through the whole list of the book of Numbers, saying, this is for you guys. Pay attention. Don't be foolish like the children of Israel were in the wilderness. And then he starts going through the list of the stories we'll learn in the book of Numbers. We'll look at that coming up. But look at Psalm 78, verse 14 through 16. In the daytime also he led them with the cloud, and all the night with the light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness. He gave them drinks in abundance with the depths. He also broke streams out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. In verse 23 to 29 of Psalm 78, yet he had commanded the clouds above. He opened the doors of heaven. He rained down manna on them to eat and given them of the bread of heaven. Men ate angels' food. He sent them food to the full. He caused an east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his powers he brought into the south winds, and he rained meat on them like dust, feathered fowl like the sand of the seas. And he let them fall in the midst of their camp and all around their dwellings. So they ate and were filled, and he gave them their own desire. There's a lot more to that story. Nehemiah was greatly encouraged by this. Yet in manifold mercies, you did not forsake them in the wilderness. I mean, if God were going to forsake him, it would have been in this time. Okay? If he said, I'm done with you, it would have been in that 40 years in the wilderness for sure. But you did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud did not depart from them by day to lead them on the road, nor the pillar of fire by night to show them light and the day and the way they should go. You also gave your good spirit to instruct them, and did not withhold your manna from their mouth, and gave them water for their thirst. 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. The nature of God. So if any of you think a good way to discipline kids is send them to bed without food, God never did that. You know, if I were God, I'm just like, I'll just shut the nightlight off. You know how dark it is in the desert? I've been in the desert where you literally can't see the hand in front of your face. I love the desert. And I remember one time in Borrego, I just got a big jug of water and I just started walking. And I was on the roads outside of Borrego. But I was walking and walking. I mean, I'd probably walked 10 miles or so. And then I knew exactly where I was going, I thought. And I finally came to this road and I realized, I don't know where I'm at. And I didn't have a flashlight. And I climbed up this pole and tried to see the name on the sign, and I couldn't. It was too dark. And I honestly thought I was going to die. But anyway, make a long story short, I survived. And but he never shut off the light. He never turned off the manna. He never left them with the Spirit, stayed right there with them. And I'll tell you what, we're going to find out these guys were stinkers. They were stinkers. God blessing, this pillar of cloud by day, this pillar of fire by night, this manna, angel food coming right down in front of your tent. And all they could do is complain and murmur. Well, in Matthew 6, verse 25 and 26, it says, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life. What will you eat or what shall you drink, nor about your body what you shall put on? Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more value than they?" Skipping down to verse 31 to 33 of Matthew 6. "Therefore do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For after all these things the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. You seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you."